Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first ProRevenge story of the day comes from Billiam201, $10 and a pencil. A post I made in another subreddit reminded me of this one. Enjoy. A few years ago, after changing jobs, I found myself in a new office with a new phone number. After some orientation, training, and other new hire stuff, I finally get to sit down and do the job. I get my voicemail and answering machine set up the email, and the phone rings. Good morning, Railroad Engineering. Yeah, when can I take the GED test? Sorry, wrong number. Click. Rings again. Seriously, when can I take the GED test? Like I said, wrong number. Bye. This went on for weeks, 15 to 20 calls a day. People screaming at me for not being the Adult Learning Center. One day, an epiphany. This isn't the Adult Learning Center? Nope. Do you know the number? Check Google. I did. This is the number on their website. Oh, really? A little Google foo of my own, and I dig up a few numbers and give them a call. They tell me that they don't maintain their website, and there's nothing they can do about it, and it's not their problem. I'm just going to have to deal with it. My favorite line of that conversation was, "What are you going to do about it? I work for the state. You can't do crap. Bye-bye." And you can imagine that bye-bye just dripped with condescension that only hubris and decades of Karenhood can muster. Oh, hell no. Let's dance. The next day. Good morning, Railroad. When can I take the GED test? We give that on request. It takes about an hour and a half. Come on down. Oh, awesome. How much is it? $10. Bring a pencil. We'll sharpen yours, but can't supply them. Budget cuts, you know. Nah, I get it. See you in a bit. Take your time. They don't like me telling you this, but if you get here before we close, they have to give you the test. See you when you get here. Thanks, man. See you later. Now, for those of you who don't know, the GED test takes a whole day. It also usually costs upward of $100 depending on the state. In the state I was living and working at the time, it was around $200. As such, it was only offered at certain intervals. So, as I was telling dozens of people per day that it was $10, took 90 minutes, and offered on request, I'm sure that they were absolutely inundated with angry people with freshly sharpened number 2 pencils, waving their $10 bills and demanding the tests that the guy on the phone told them that they could come and take. Every morning, I checked the website to see if my phone number was still on there. I also took the liberty of crawling around and getting the phone numbers for some managers. I was happy to hand these out when people called back to complain that they hadn't been allowed to take their test. Head back down there and speak to random director and tell them that they called the number on the website and this is what they were told. It took them about 6 more weeks to change the website. For some reason, all of the managers' numbers disappeared from the website as well. I'm so conflicted on this story. Like, that's some incredible revenge. OP quite literally had his own little angry army. But this little army was sort of just caught in the crossfire of the real problem. But hey, you know what? Even though it was a bit unethical, it solved the problem, right? Our next story comes from Switch SCE to Aux. Screw me on my bonus, make me do 2 jobs, enjoy the backwater you earned. So, back in the 90s, I was working for a European-based financial firm. US offices were managed by Europeans with a regional head office in New York. Younger employees were generally underpaid and overworked. As in your first few years out of college, the promised reward was being promoted to a director position where the salary, perks, and bonus structure would really kick in. Kind of like how law firms promote their youngest lawyers to partners after a long wait. As junior associates, the only good news was that we received the same 5 weeks of vacation per year, plus a few weeks of sick leave as our European counterparts, which meant me doing a lot of camping and staycations during the summer, since I didn't really make enough to travel to exotic and expensive locations. The offices were set up in a way where the business development, BD, directors each had a junior associate. The BD guys would generally network, schmooze, and travel around to territories to meet clients and new prospects. Once back in the office, the BD guys would dump their meeting notes on the desks of the junior associates to follow up and land the business, aka a hunter/Skinner model. As a junior associate, I was pretty busy assisting a BD, so I routinely rolled over at least 2 weeks of vacation every year. I had worked at the firm for 3 years and was starting to get antsy for a promotion. Right after Thanksgiving, my boss in the West Coast office told me that I was being transferred and promoted to the Southeast office come the new year. I really had no interest in working or living in the Southeast, but I wanted to advance my career. I rolled over my usual 2 weeks of vacation into the next year, so I was eligible for 7 weeks of vacation that next year. After celebrating New Year's with my family in California, I packed up my car and drove across the country. Once in the new office, I settled in and met my new boss, who promptly informed me that he wasn't actually promoting me to director, though I was being given the responsibilities of the role as he judged me to be, quote, too young, but was also told that if I demonstrated that I could do the job, I would be promoted next year. I was pissed, but didn't have a choice other than moving back home and starting from scratch. So I agreed to it. I disliked my new boss instantly, as coworkers told me he was flaunting his management perks, which consisted of large allowances for housing and automobiles, which were paid for by sales production from employees like myself. Turned out he was related to a serving member of the board of directors back in Europe, which is how he got the job as a regional manager. Everyone knew he didn't have the skills to do our job, so he just collected fat checks, went to expensive restaurants with friends, and billed it to the company as client development, all while leasing a new Mercedes every 2 years on the company's dime, while generally being horrible to everyone who worked for him. During the first week, I also met my junior associate, Jeremy. We sat down and discussed some accounts that I'd inherited that were in backwater locations none of the other directors wanted to visit. Jeremy was professional, but I got the distinct impression Jeremy hated me, though I didn't know why. I started traveling around to meet my clients and prospects over the next few weeks, usually spending at least 3 or 4 days on the road, back in the office on Fridays to go over follow-ups on business leads with Jeremy, and execute whatever paperwork needed to be taken care of. About a month later, I returned from one of my trips and learned that Jeremy had quit. It turned out that he was mad that he'd been passed over for the position that I'd been given. I couldn't fault him, as I probably would have done the same thing. I asked my manager to hire someone else to back me up, but he was hesitant to do so, reasoning that my client portfolio was just starting out, so I could do both roles until it made sense to staff up. I pointed out that it would be hard to be an effective business development officer if I had no support system to help grow my client portfolio, but he chose not to listen, knowing that I had little recourse but to shut the heck up. I spent the rest of the year working my butt off. This was right before email and internet were common, so executing business on the road was hard. Fax machines were the bane of my existence. Even though laptops were reserved for directors, my boss was kind enough, heavy sarcasm, to let me use a company laptop on which I would handle all of the paperwork to process client business from hotel business centers late at night or early in the morning, so I learned to live on 5 hours of sleep, or to sleep on planes whenever I could. After dealing with problems from some irate clients, I eventually paid for my own personal cell phone, as I had to handle customers from the road. Not everyone had them in the mid-90s, and our directors had just started getting company-paid phones that year. I just gave my personal cell number for clients to call, so I could handle problems from the road. I landed a few big clients by a combination of luck and hard work, and got some solid referrals, which led to more referrals. So within a few months, I was getting some serious momentum. Since I didn't have an associate to help me, that meant I spent the weekends and late nights back at the office handling paperwork, then back on the road during the week. I was so busy working both sides of the job that by December of that year, I hadn't taken my mandatory 2 weeks of vacation. I had some new clients that needed to be handled by year end, so I was granted a vacation waiver, meaning that my 7 weeks of vacation would roll over into the next year, adding up to 12 weeks of vacation plus sick time for the coming year. It was a big hassle for HR to process the waiver, but since I had produced a lot of new business, my manager was all too happy to order it done. I wasn't upset about working through year end, though I flew back and forth to California for Christmas on a 24-hour turnaround. I rationalized it, hoping that I would get paid the first big bonus of my career in a few months. At that time, European firms paid their bonuses in mid-April, while employees of US-based firms got their bonuses by the end of January. If you were planning on switching jobs early in the new year, working at a European firm meant that sometimes you left money on the table, aka golden handcuffs. so the timing of switching firms was important. I continued to work at my pace through April, taking no vacation as I was bringing in more and more clients and digging myself out of paperwork when I wasn't on the road. In the new year, we had some meetings about scorecards and sales goals, and I led my office in some of the categories, and was number 1 for overall production. Finally, in mid-April, my boss called me in and announced it was time to discuss my bonus/annual review. I eagerly sat down, licking my chops because I was assuming my bonus would be equal to my base salary at least, if not double. He handed me a piece of paper, and it showed a number that was almost 90% less than what I was expecting for my bonus. I literally laughed out loud and told him it was a little late for an April Fool's joke, but he wasn't smiling. He proceeded to tell me how proud of me he was, but since I wasn't a director, the bonus that I received was the maximum amount he would give me, as, quote, there wasn't any more money in the budget. I sat there in shock for a while, then kept asking the same question in different ways. Basically, why did he screw me over on my bonus? It was like talking to a brick wall. Despite pointing to the scorecard that showed me as the best producer in the office, all while having no junior associate, he wasn't having it. I was crushed, but then asked him if he was promoting me to director, since I had demonstrated that I could produce, hoping that title would be a gateway into the big payday the following year. He shook his head and replied, maybe next year if you prove this year wasn't a fluke. It was a gut punch. He also rationalized that while my review was positive, I had some flaws that I needed to work on, mainly that I didn't work very well in a team atmosphere. I reminded him that I was a team of 1, so there wasn't anybody on my team to complain about me. A switch finally flipped on in my brain as I realized that I'd just gotten majorly screwed and there was no changing the outcome. I told him that I was feeling ill and would be taking some sick days, so I got up and left his office. Coworkers said I looked as white as a ghost as I walked out of his office, so they knew something was wrong. I forwarded my incoming calls to his extension, packed up my important papers in case I decided to never come back, then headed to my apartment in a complete rage. I called my family and told them that I needed to come home for some much-deserved vacation. So after drinking myself senseless for 48 hours and forwarding all my calls to voicemail, I called in to work the following Monday and told my boss I would be taking a vacation week. He was pretty angry about the short notice, as he'd been dealing with all my irate clients, contacting him about their problems since I couldn't be reached, and he didn't have much of a clue as to how to handle the paperwork necessary to do the work, so other associates were now being called in to help handle my workload. I flew home and made a few calls to people I'd worked with, hoping for some job leads. I managed to grab lunch with an old associate who had left the firm, and he gave me some ideas and contacts, so I spent the rest of my vacation looking for a new job. I knew the timing sucked, so out of options, I went back to my job the following week. First day back, I looked at my HR data and realized that I still had 11 weeks of vacation to use that year, plus a few more weeks of sick leave. Around that time, there was a company-wide conference call to celebrate a big company milestone. I think the firm was 125 years old, but I didn't care anymore. To celebrate the big anniversary, we were told that we would be getting an extra week of vacation that year, meaning once again, I had 3 months of vacation in my account. As a high performer, I was also selected to spend a few weeks in New York during the summer and fall for some management training, so that meant additional time out of the office. The next month was a blur of looking at different vacation options for me to take that year. I had accrued a lot of hotel and rental car points and frequent flyer miles during the past year of traveling around, so I spent my days in the office doing as little client work as I could get away with, while spending the rest of my time on the phone with the frequent flyer/hotel points customer service reps, trying to squeeze as much vacation out of my miles and points as I could. By the end of May, I submitted my vacation requests, which detailed how I was going to take 3 months of vacation in the 7 remaining months of the year. I submitted the forms to HR, and within a day, my boss called me in to discuss my schedule, as he realized I was basically going to be gone for almost 2 weeks out of every month for the rest of the year. I was wrapping my vacations around federal and bank holidays whenever I could manage it. He told me that he was rejecting my vacation schedule since there wasn't anybody to cover my clients in my absence. I asked him to call the HR rep into his office to have his stance officially on record. He objected, but I said I wouldn't discuss such matters without an HR rep present. HR was called in, and my boss told HR he was rejecting my vacation schedule, but HR responded that I was legally entitled to take the vacation days, so he couldn't reject the request. I also told him that henceforth I wouldn't be handling any of my customers from my personal cell phone if I was out of the office, so I would be forwarding my work phone to his when I was on vacation or doing business development trips. I also told him I was going to Europe on 2 different trips and would be unable to be contacted since I didn't have a company-issued cell phone. He was pissed, but he knew that unless he promoted me to director and issued me a cell phone, he couldn't do anything about my new stance. After that, I only did business development in areas where I liked to travel, and more importantly, vacation. Until that point, I had always said yes to any meetings in backwater locations if it represented a chance to land a new client. Having learned my lesson the hard way, I didn't want any new clients to begin with, and certainly none living in areas I didn't like to visit. Trips to Florida became common. If I was traveling, I would typically spend Monday to Wednesday making very infrequent sales calls. Most of my schedule was falsified with fake prospects, so I could spend afternoons playing golf or hanging out at hotel pools trolling for women my age. Then would take off Thursday and Friday for vacation/sick days so I could hang out and have fun, using hotel points to extend my stays for free. Since I was still underpaid, I ate cheaply and learned to squeeze as much out of my trips for the least amount of money I could, while still managing to have fun. My boss was now irate with all of the customer calls coming to him, but he refused to hire an assistant for me, so I kept forwarding my line to his when I was out of the office. Whenever I was back in the office, pretty infrequently at this point, he would routinely lambaste me with verbal warnings about poor performance reviews, but I would just shrug my shoulders and tell him that maybe he was right not to promote me to director since I was such a disappointment. He was also pissed because he'd been commended for having such a high-producing office the year before, mostly courtesy of my efforts. And now he was getting a lot of heat from New York that his new client numbers were down. Since I had frequent flyer miles and hotel points, but not a lot of money, I backpacked through Europe on 2 different 2-week trips that summer and also took a number of vacations back home, diligently following up on job leads on the West Coast that I had cultivated whenever I was in the office. By October, I started to firm up some conversations with a prospective employer back in California, and finally received a concrete job offer in mid-November. I waited until December 15th to inform my boss that I was quitting the firm and told him I would be using my 2 remaining weeks of vacation/sick leave so that my resignation was effective immediately. I was surprised that I didn't wait until April to leave, but I laughed, telling him I knew he was going to screw me on my bonus anyway, so the money wasn't worth waiting around for. He then asked me to stay through the end of January in order to give him enough time to hire and train an assistant or a replacement to handle my clients. I refused, noting that Jeremy had quit 20 months before, so he had plenty of time to prepare for this eventuality. As I was packing up my office and informing coworkers about my departure, I got a knock on my office door from the HR rep, as he wanted to conduct an exit interview. He closed the door and I aired out all of my dirty laundry. I told HR the firm had lost me when my boss had screwed me on my bonus, repeating the story that there wasn't any money in the budget. The HR counterpart shook his head and laughed at my boss's stupidity, noting that since Jeremy had been an employee at the beginning of the year I'd arrived, his salary and bonus was actually in the budget for the whole year. As such, my boss could have allocated the money that he would have paid Jeremy to my bonus, which probably would have kept me reasonably happy. Instead, he decided to screw me over. I moved back to California that week and started a new job the first week of January. 3 months into my new job, I got a call from a coworker at my previous firm. He called to tell me that after I left, HR from the head office in New York came down early in the new year to interview my former coworkers. Apparently, my sudden departure had raised some eyebrows in New York, as they viewed me as a rising star, and questions were asked why I left so abruptly. Apparently, other employees in my office had also gotten screwed in various ways. Lots of client development meal expenses were rejected for being too expensive by the guy who was routinely billing his meals with friends to the firm. So, after listening to all of the complaints, New York management decided to make a change years before he was due to be rotated back to Europe. Since he was related to a guy on the board, they couldn't fire him, so they reassigned my old boss to some backwater farm town. I couldn't pronounce the town, but was told that it was the kind of place that doesn't provide perks like allowances for housing, accounts for expensive steak restaurants, or a new Mercedes. I started my own company 5 years back, and it's worked out pretty well. Even though I got screwed 25 years ago, I always think about that experience fondly, as I probably would have worked for a company like that for my entire life, had I not been shown how companies and bosses will generally screw you over if given half a chance. It was an eye-opening experience and put me on a path to eventually start my own firm, so for that, I'm forever grateful. I always think about that situation around New Year's to remind myself of how far I've come and for how not to treat my employees. Hopefully, some of you can benefit from my experience without all of the drama I went through. Happy New Year. It's ridiculous just how often I hear horror stories about companies just screwing over their employees, almost for no reason. It's just cruel to lead on an employee for an entire year, screw them over, and then say, oh hey, maybe next year, which just starts the cycle again, and there's no guarantee of getting a reward. And people wonder why that whole great resignation thing was a thing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I'll see you in the next video.